30 years ago, my neighbors across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Stein, endured a terrible loss. Their son, Adam, disappeared on Halloween. It was assumed he was kidnapped, as there was a rash of kidnappings in the area at the time. The kidnapper was never found, neither was Adam. Today is the 30th anniversary of his disappearance. To the Steins, the wounds are still fresh. They refuse to decorate their yard, despite all of the houses on the street going out of their way to be as festive as possible. They don't give out candy, despite the rest of the houses on the street trying to one-up each other by giving out better loot than their neighbors. The Steins mourn quietly in their dark house, the television being the only light emanating from their window. Children are advised by their parents not to knock on their door. I've always felt bad for them. I've lived here for 40 years. I remember the frantic search and rescue efforts that swept through our town. Even though I was barely 20 years old and living with my unemployed father while working double shifts to pay our mortgage, I did my part and joined the search. It was the least I could do. Like all futile searches, it ended after a while. Adam was presumed dead. The Steins grew old and the neighborhood changed around us. New families moved in, and old ones either died off or moved out. Aside from me and the Steins, I'd say the average age of the homeowners here is 35, and they all have a lot of kids. A terrible rumor started to spread a couple years ago. I know who started it. An older, nasty child named Chuck Demopoulos. He told his younger brothers and neighborhood friends that Adam's ghost haunts the woods behind our street. He said Mr. Stein killed him himself and chopped him up into little bits. When I heard about the rumor, I was disgusted. The disrespect was so vulgar and uncalled for. I prayed the Steins wouldn't hear this, but I'm sure they must have. It was pervasive. I called Chuck's father and told him what I had heard, and I suspect Chuck caught a beating for it. Still, I'm afraid the damage had already been done. Despite pitying the Steins, I don't express my sympathy by refusing to decorate my house and yard. I love Halloween. Always have. I like to see parents beaming from the street while their kids nervously ring doorbells and collect piles of candy. The spirit of the season keeps me feeling young, despite being well past my prime and having to deal with high blood pressure. Being an old-timer has its perks sometimes, though. I have Halloween decorations they don't sell anymore. Ghoulish stuff, like hangman's nooses. Things that are too politically incorrect for stores to sell nowadays. I firmly believe Halloween shouldn't be sanitized. It should be scary and unsettling. That said, there needs to be an emotional component too. Not just blood and guts for the sake of blood and guts. There needs to be poignancy. Something that'll stick with you after you see it. That's why Adam helps me decorate. After my father died in '89, I emptied out his safety deposit box. There was an envelope with a note and a Polaroid photograph. All the note said was, I caught him snooping around the cellar. I had to teach him a lesson. The photograph was of fresh cement drying on the basement wall. In the middle of the night, I went into the cellar and opened the wall. Adam's body was inside. My instinctive reaction was to call the police, but I was terrified I'd be arrested. They would never believe the note. So I sealed the wall. After a while, I stopped thinking about the dead boy in the bowels of my house. Many years later, after talking with Mrs. Stein about Adam on a Halloween afternoon, I knew what I had to do. I took his remains out of the wall in 2014. He was only a skeleton by that point. I separated the bones, splashed them with fake blood, and incorporated them into my Halloween decorations. At first, I was worried. As the days went by, though, I realized I didn't need to be concerned. The bones blended in with the rest of the decorations. Just more festive material in a neighborhood chock full of it. This morning, when I went out to get the paper, Mr. Stein was doing the same. We met in the street and chatted for a while. We talked about the Cowboys game from last night, and he mentioned his wife made a spectacular coffee cake that he'd bring me a piece later. I smiled and told him that would be real nice. Before we parted ways, Mr. Stein said, "I never told you how much Shannon and I appreciated all your help you gave us back when we lost Adam. We knew how busy you were. It's been 30 years today, you know. 30 years. I felt guilt and sadness wash over me. I'm sure he's in a better place now," I told him. He nodded and I saw tears in his eyes. He was a good boy. "I know wherever he is, he's watching over us," he said. We hugged briefly, then went back to our respective homes. I walked up the driveway, past the ghosts dangling from my trees by their nooses, and headed up my front steps. I looked at the skull hanging above my doorway. It was pointed directly at the Steins' house. Mr. Stein was right. Their son is watching over them.